Welcome everyone to Connected Learning TV. Thanks for joining us as we kick off a month-long partnership with EdTech Teacher on preparing for a year of mobile learning. I'm Montero Garcia. I'm currently an assistant professor at Colorado State University and former Los Angeles High School English teacher, and I'm going to be your host today. Throughout August, we're taking an in-depth look at how to prepare for a school year that, for many educators, will include heavy mobile and tablet technology integration for the first time. We're going to be talking with our guests on how this focus ties into connected learning in a minute, but let's go over a few quick details before we dive in. So to those participating on Livestream right now, hello. We encourage you to use the chat there to introduce yourselves, connect with each other, and pose questions for those here in the Google Plus Hangout. I'm going to try to jump in there, so please just direct any questions and we'll jump into them. Speaking of Google Plus, there's a fast-growing connected learning community with over 2,000 members, and we'd love for you to be a part of that conversation happening there. The link to the Google Plus community should be included in the live stream chat, so look for it there. The link for our public group notes Google Doc for today should also be in the live stream chat by now. We'd really appreciate your energy in capturing highlights and sharing resources related to today's conversation. That Google Doc's going to remain open to the public so we can continue adding to it even after today. We're really joined by an amazing group of people here in the Hangout, and I want to give everyone a chance to briefly introduce themselves. So if you can just briefly, I think I'm going to just go from my left to right with you, Jason. If you could just briefly give us an overview of who you are, what kind of work you're doing, and maybe what you hope people will gain from this month's series of webinars.
Sure. Let's see. I'm an 11-year teacher. I teach in Medfield, Massachusetts, at the Blake Middle School. I'm an 8th grade physical science teacher. Last year was our first year of an iPad pilot where we received district-purchased iPads for 1/3 of the 8th grade. So not every kid in the school had an 8th grade or had an iPad. The iPads were one-to-one, and the students were able to bring the iPads home, use them at home, then bring them back to school and use them from day to day. Next year we are going, the whole 8th grade will bring their own iPads. They won't be supplied by the district. They will be supplied by the families of the students, and we're looking forward to another successful year with the iPad.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. Let's go to you, Susie. And you might be muted.
There we go. I'm a full-time 3rd grade teacher. I'm in a K-4 elementary school on Cape Cod where it's gorgeous today. I'm also a part-time professional development provider where I try to help teachers manage opportunities for tech integration. And in our classroom this past year, we had a pilot of BYOD, so 3rd graders were bringing their own devices, and we were also able to roll in a cart of 20 iPads twice a week. So we had kind of that dual benefit in our classroom. And I think implementing mobile devices should be a well-thought-out process mixed in with a little sense of adventure. So I think that this webinar series will be helpful to so many people in that regard.
Thanks, Susie. Todd?
Great. So I'm the assistant superintendent in Sudbury, Massachusetts, which is actually a K-8 district, no high school here. Former elementary school principal and former middle school special ed teacher. And we are rolling out I'm the black sheep in the group. We're rolling out a Chromebook pilot in our 6th grade with one team for the coming year. So that's 95 students. The pilot itself is grant funded, though we wouldn't anticipate rolling out further with grant funds. We're still looking at income streams for the rest of it. And we're working on integrating actually multiple devices without being BYOD. So we have a lot of heavy investment in iPads, iPods in the district as well, and we're looking at how to combine all those resources. And my hope would be that we've made all the mistakes along the way in getting started so other people don't have to.
Thanks, Todd. And last but not least, Tom, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, certainly. Hi, everybody. I'm Tom DeCord. I'm Director of EdTech Teacher. I'm a former high school history teacher. So EdTech Teacher is a professional learning organization, and we work with various schools and districts on helping them in using technology in purposeful, effective ways. Over the last couple of years, we've been very involved in iPad integration in schools and districts across the country. And we led the first national summit on iPads in education, which was held at Harvard University last fall. Followed that up with one in Atlanta, and we're coming back to Boston in November, and then we go to San Diego in 2014. So much of what we do is try to help teachers and administrators with conceptual frameworks and practical strategies on integrating iPads and the technology along with, in the classroom, along with other mobile technologies as well.
Awesome, thanks. And thanks again, everybody, for joining us. I think this is going to be a fun hour of conversation here. I'm looking forward to where this is going to go. Tom, I'm wondering if we can take a few minutes to help everyone look at a focus for this webinar series through the lens of connected learning. Do you want to unpack that a little bit?
Sure, I'm very, very happy to unpack that. So what we're attempting to do is try to help teachers as they embark in these mobile classrooms. So as we know, there's been a huge influx of iPads and other mobile technologies into classrooms. And so these technologies arriving in unprecedented numbers. And of course, teachers and school administrators are sort of grappling with the fundamental question of how do we use them effectively? How can they help teaching and learning? And there are a lot of practical considerations that go along with that, and access and equity and workflow and sharing. And so we help schools and we help school districts with both a conceptual framework of how to maximize the iPad as a consumption device, of course, but also as a curation platform, as a creativity device, and also a connection platform for sharing and for collaborating with others, and also help them through practical workflow strategies, selection of fundamental or core apps to help student-centered projects. So this series hopefully will provide both kind of a philosophical underpinning and a conceptual framework, but with lots of practical tips and strategies. And I think the great educators we have today, with their varied experiences, will get us off to a great start.
Thanks, Tom. And I think what I want to do is just point us to, you unpacked this a little bit, but I think I want to just point us to some of the connected learning principles that are going to underlie a lot of the conversation today, and then pass it back to Tom again. And those principles are probably familiar to some of our viewers, and the principles I want to really talk about are the ways that mobile technology can make it easier for learning to be production-centered, openly networked, academically oriented, and add to peer learning and feedback. And I know these are concepts that we've tangled with in this series for a while now. So I think what I'm going to do is hand it back to Tom, and he can help us think through these examples with our guests today.
Well, Terry, you mentioned production-centered. So in working with the iPad and working with mobile devices, a fundamental question is, how can students demonstrate their knowledge, their understanding, their mastery of curriculum content through the production of these presentations or these projects, these reports, using these different modalities. So the iPad, one way of thinking of the iPad is that a portable media creation device. So students can create just about anything, anywhere at any time. So what would you like students to do? What would you like students to create? So there's a couple of fundamental questions I think for us to grapple with. You mentioned the network capabilities. And more comprehensive vision of the iPad. For example, we do have the world's information at our fingertips. So through the webs, we have untold number of pedagogical and curriculum content resources, and all sorts of opportunities to share and collaborate with others. So interestingly enough, we often begin our iPad workshops with the web, and focusing on perhaps broadening a vision or bringing in a slightly more comprehensive framework for using the iPad. And yeah, in terms of academic orientation, I mean, we're talking about a device, as I mentioned before, you can create just about anything. It is portable, it is flexible, it can meet the needs of diverse learners, and you can differentiate your instruction and your activities in multiple ways. And of course, we're very much in a mobile technology and mobile ed tech environment now, where increasingly the future of education is mobile. So whether it be the iPad or another mobile device, it is in tune with the way that we communicate, the way that we collect information, and the way that we collaborate with others.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. And then I'm wondering if, Tom, because I think you know our guests a lot better than I do, if you want us to jump in and hear some of the examples of these practices happening in their classrooms or the different school spaces. Not everyone's in a classroom on our panel today.
Well, that's it. We have, we have administrators, we have teachers here. I've had the pleasure of working most closely with Susie, and I've seen many of her presentations, and she's done some workshops on our behalf, and she's one of the most talented and thoughtful and inspiring educators that I've ever seen. One of the sort of the underlying philosophies that I see in her class is that she really wants to connect her kids to the world, and she emphasizes what students can create, what students can do, and then she creates an audience so that she makes the activities and the performances of her students available so that parents can view. She really tries to create a community for her teachers. And I know Todd and Jason, and they've got great reputations, and I see them on Twitter, and so they bring also this kind of thoughtfulness, this sort of sense of purpose of the iPad not simply as a device for consumption, but something that can help nurture some of the essential skills and competencies that we need in today's world. So, like everybody, I'm kind of curious to hear more about what they're doing and the kind of practices and activities that their students are engaged in.
So, Susie, it sounds like you've used these devices to help kind of expand the world for your children in terms of opening up that community. Is that right? Can you share that a little bit with us?
Absolutely. I think it's something that we were trying to do even before we had the opportunity to use mobile devices in the classroom. I was trying to have students log on and leave comments on our blog, or I was trying to upload things that I had recorded of them doing, but I had never been able to get that opportunity where they could create their own content and then upload it themselves. So what I think the iPads and having the mobile devices with our BYOD program has enabled students to do is they've become internet authors, really. They each have their own kid blog. They're each creating content and videos and screencasts that are able to share what it is that they're learning in the classroom. And over the course of the year, they became very adept at what they were doing. And I didn't foresee that at all. I think that it was amazing to see their growth when it came to digital dexterity, really, as the year went on and what they were able to do come June. So it's been wonderful to be able to share all of that online. It gives them a broader audience. No longer do kids want to just share stuff with their teacher. In fact, they think that's pretty lame if I'm the only one who's going to see it. They want to be able to share it even beyond their own family. It's pretty cool if grandma sees it, or if a parent or a relative lives far away and they get to see it. But they want the actual world to see it. And what that is perceived to them might be different for every kid, but they know that the potential is there for the whole world to see what they're doing, and that is so valuable to them.
Thanks, Susie. And I'm curious if you have a specific example of one of the ways that this is unfolded in your classroom?
Sure. Yep, we used this year the app that we really used a lot is a screencasting app called Educreations, and the students learned how to use it in September and October, and by the end of the year I was pretty blown away with how they were able to use it. So, for instance, we did a pilot this year with a brand new math program, which included bar modeling, which was new to all of us and very tricky to be able to solve math word problems using bar modeling. So what they were able to do by, I would have to say maybe April, is work in cooperative pairs and create what we called flip over math videos, where two students would work together to solve one problem, and they would find two different ways to do it, and they could create a screencast with, we had a little logo that they used, and they would find one way to solve it, and then they would flip over the math and the other student would solve it. It was a great way to share with other classes who this year will now be part of the new math program to see how to solve some of these bar modeling problems.
That's really cool. And I want to hear some other examples from other folks as well. Jason and Todd, I know that we're in different kinds of contexts. Jason, I'm wondering if you have some examples that have taken place as well that you can share with us?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. A couple of examples that come off the top of my head from this past year is we've really taken a liking to an app called Explain Everything. And the students are able to create content and add audio and add video to images and pictures and create things and presentations that are really unlike anything I've ever seen before. A very specific example that we had students do was we were studying the layers of the Earth, and we had students work in pairs, and they created a model of the Earth where, through Explain Everything, they were able to zoom in on the different layers of the Earth. And while they were traveling towards the center of the Earth, they were able to add dialogue to, to explain facts and what it would be like to experience traveling through the layers of the Earth, and as far as temperature and pressure and different things like that. Another example that I found to be very successful using Explain Everything was we teach the phases of the moon, which for some students to manipulate objects without seeing them move, it can be very difficult. And through Explain Everything, we had the kids create the phases of the moon and were able to simulate the motion of the moon as it travels around the Earth in relationship to the sun. So those are two specific examples. And then what we were able to do, like Susie said, is we take the videos and then we were able to put them up on the website for other students to use, and we would share them with each other. So students would see how other peers approached a problem or a situation, and they could learn from it. And it seemed to be a very successful way to learn the concepts.
Thanks, Jason. And then I want to hear, Todd, I know you're not in the classroom currently, but I'm curious how you might be supporting these types of practices at the administrative level.
Sure. And I was sitting there thinking of a lot of great examples, even just from visits to the classroom and working with teachers, and I could give you a few, but I really want to tie together a little bit of the production piece, which is really my favorite part about giving kids the opportunities to be creative and giving them the tools they need to do it with the collaboration. And I was talking with a student who had posted a draft of her writing to her blog in order to receive feedback, not from people across the world, but from her classmates, in a really kind of easily facilitated way. And I went up to her and I asked her, I said, so what do you think of that? What's that like when your classmates give you feedback? And I expected to hear something like, oh, it made me really nervous, or I wasn't sure. And her face just absolutely lit up. And she went on to talk about how she feels like it makes her a better writer, and she loves the feedback. And so it just reminded me never to kind of doubt how well students will take to that sort of thing. As far as supporting teachers in their classrooms with doing it, I think the most important thing from my perspective, from the administrative perspective, is making sure that they know they are supported in being creative themselves as the instructional experts, and that they have the opportunity to take risks and try things, knowing that maybe half of them won't work. But the important part is that they learn from it, that their students learn from it, and that's our learning process as educators and adults. And I want them to know from me and from their principals that not only is that okay, but we really expect it.
Thanks, Todd. I really appreciate hearing that. And I am reflecting back on my experience in the classroom a couple years ago and not feeling supported by my principal in Los Angeles in terms of the kind of work I was trying to do with a class, and we were all using iPod Touches at the time. And one of the things that the principal used to usually connect with me was that this work needed to be standards aligned, and then I would show him that this work was standards aligned, and we were still just using iPads and iPods. I'm sorry, iPods. I couldn't afford iPads at the time. But I'm curious to hear from any of you, as well as you, Tom, about standards, because I think that might be a buzzword for a lot of people watching this right now, and how those might relate to mobile technology and learning in the classroom.
I'm happy to pick up where I left off a little bit, Antero.
Please.
So to me, having the technology, one-to-one technology, in some ways doesn't, the only thing that changes is that it gives the teachers and the students more and more paths to get to the standards and makes it more likely that they're going to get there. So whether we had lots of technology or no technology, we'd still be looking at the same standard. And saying to the teachers, you're the instructional expert, you're the person who collaborated with your team, with your administrators, can figure out the best way to get there. So what the technology does is it simply, in my mind, takes out all sorts of roadblocks that were there before. So just one quick example would be primary sources. If in middle school or younger we want kids in social studies and English language arts to be doing research into primary sources in order to do their writing, what does the iPad or the Chromebook or whatever device do but give them such greater access to those primary sources and opportunity to talk about it with others. So to me, in my mind, the technology removes the stumbling blocks to get other ways to the standards.
Thanks, Todd. And Jason, I know you had some thoughts on this too. Do you want to chime in here?
Yeah, I mean, that was a big concern when we met with the parents in the beginning of the year who found out that their kids were going to have iPads. The big concern was, are they going to lose out? Are they not going to be learning the same curriculum that the other two teams are going to learn? And in fact, we actually use common assessment. So the tests that were given by the other two science teachers was the same exact test that was being given by the teachers on my cluster, and we have common assessment across all the disciplines. So we were still hitting all the standards that the other teachers were hitting. We just had a different way to reach them and a different way to enhance the curriculum and different ways at looking at different material as we went along the way. And we found it to be very successful and in comparing our data and looking at results from tests that kids without the iPads had and kids with the iPads had, that we didn't find any statistical anomalies where either the kids were, the big concern was that the kids were lacking or losing some of the content that they should have been learning. And again, that was a huge concern from the parents that found out that we were starting this iPad pilot.
Thanks, Jason. And Tom, do you want to jump in here and talk a little bit about some of the work that you've seen in terms of standards and connections here?
Sure. I wanted to build on both Todd and Jason's points. Todd was mentioning the ability to access primary sources, and that's dear to my heart as a 15-year history teacher. And so on the iPad, I can have students simply Google Constitution PDF. And on the iPad, they have a PDF document that can be immediately opened up in an annotation app. So we can be immersed in a critical thinking process where we're consuming this primary source, but we're also analyzing the primary source. We may be annotating the primary source, and then we may be organizing and tagging it and classifying it as well. So that's a fairly seamless activity. In that annotation process might be using an annotation app such as Notability, which provides sort of traditional annotation features, the highlighting, the underlining, handwritten notes, type notes, but I can also include voice, which means a student can add audio summary or audio analysis, or I as a teacher can add prompts, can add questions. And we can also insert web pages, and those web pages could include a video, could include a podcast, a graph, a chart. So it extends the possibilities for more enhanced understanding of a primary source.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate that. I'm going to actually jump to a question I saw in the chat, and this is just a reminder for other folks in the chat. Please throw anything in there and we'll see. We'll see if we can stump the webinar today. But the question that is one that's actually near and dear to my heart in terms of what I've experienced in Los Angeles. And I think I'm going to ask you first, Susie. The question was, how do you protect privacy of the students and still share the work that the students are doing? Because I think this came out of what you said early on, Susie, about being able to build beyond the boring audience of a single teacher, right? So I'm curious what you think about that privacy question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it comes in two parts. One is that students need to learn to protect their privacy, and I don't think that there's an age young enough to be able to start teaching that. So I find that it's a real opportunity to be able to teach them digital citizenship, but also monitoring their own digital footprint. And when they're that young, I don't want them ever to link their face with their name. And I know that in some districts, the parents sign off on some type of permission or release that does allow you to post pictures of students or student work, and sometimes it doesn't limit whether or not there's a name with the face, so I think that teachers should really give that consideration a lot of thought. So I make sure that if there's a photograph of students on my blog or on their blogs that there are no names. Actually, the students can't put pictures of themselves on their blog because their blog has their name on it. But if there's videos, we don't even use student names in videos. In our class, we use student numbers. Everybody knows everybody's number. I've seen other teachers who they use nicknames. They've all come up with some wacky nicknames, and within a few weeks, everybody knows everybody else's nickname. But I think it's imperative to be able to protect that privacy so that you can then put out all of this amazing work to a more global audience. You feel more secure in being able to do that because then you know that there's no way to link the two together.
Thanks, Susie. And I'm curious if anyone else, I'll just open this up to the rest of you, has thoughts around the privacy issue, especially with mobile devices and filters and kind of the barriers we might see in terms of that. Does anyone else want to jump in on this question?
Sure. I mean, I can add. I mean, it's very similar to what Susie said. We're very careful about not having the kids' pictures or videos be posted online, and we do go through a system where if we're going to use a piece of student work or picture or video that's going to be posted on the district's website, then we do go through a process where the permission has to be given by the parent. But it definitely is something, as we went through this pilot this year, it was definitely a big concern of ours to make sure that we do protect these children, because they do make mistakes, and we don't want it to be a mistake that can follow them.
Thanks, Jason. And Tom, do you want to ring in on this as well?
Sure, I think there's no question that we have to be very careful about the privacy of minors, and we don't expect kids to immediately cross the street safely on their own. We help guide them and make them understand about red lights and yellow lights and green lights and cars and look for signals and whatnot, but they eventually do have to cross that street by themselves. There are all sorts of interesting opportunities. I'm thinking about a kindergarten class in New Hampshire that Skypes and connects publicly online through a blog as well with a class in Saskatchewan in Canada. And so the kids in New Hampshire can teach the kids in Canada about horseshoe crabs on Skype by holding up the crabs. So we have kindergarten classes, first grade class, second grade class, third grade classes like Susie's and others that are not only publishing student content for parents and others to see, but are actively teaching others about themselves, their culture, about events transpiring in their community. I think that kind of exchange is really wonderful and something that we should promote.
Thanks, Tom. And then I'm going to actually ring back around to you. I'm thinking about the title for today's webinar, Planning for Effective Teaching and Learning with Mobile Devices. And I'm curious, as someone who's helped frame today's webinar, if you can tell me what you mean by effective, and then maybe we can open it up to the rest of the folks as well.
Sure. Well, I think at the heart of the whole process is student learning. Is there evidence that we're augmenting, maybe even redefining the learning experience with students? That's the prism through which we evaluate all technology. It's not about the devices. It's not about the infrastructure or bandwidth. It's about what's happening in the classroom and our students learning. So one of the challenges we have is to try to assess the impact of these devices. Mind you, really the biggest indicator of success will be the skill of the teacher in using the device. It won't be the device in and of itself. So we have to ask ourselves, how could we use it effectively? I think first and foremost, it's the sort of prism or framework through which we frame the iPad. And I would argue that the best, most effective framework is the iPad as a portable media creation device, where kids are creating educational content, unleashing, nurturing student creativity. So in that sense, what would be the apps and the strategies? I mean, Jason has talked about Explain Everything, which is a wonderful screencasting app, and Susie EduCreations. If I could only choose one app for my iPad, I would choose a screencasting app, because I know that students can create just about anything with that app. So there's all sorts of ways, all sorts of different manifestations, representations of student knowledge, and these different modalities: typing, handwriting, audio, video, animation, and their special effects. So it gives me all sorts of opportunities for the students to show me what they've learned. And there are other apps that provide a wide range of creative learning possibilities themselves. So whereas most teachers will immediately embark on a review of content or grade apps, such as 50 apps for the math classroom or 50 reading apps, I think a much more effective and purposeful approach is focusing on evergreen apps. Those are apps that we could use all year long and really cut across different grade levels and different disciplines. And think about maybe having all of our apps on one screen. There's both a kind of a philosophical and a practical a point of this. The philosophical being, if we're limiting them one screen, then we're not putting undue focus on finding a content app for every curriculum topic. If you try to find a content app for every subject in U.S. history, you'd spend an inordinate amount of time, and you would run into largely drill and kill apps. Instead, focusing on evergreen apps that nurturing creativity will then limit apps. Plus, from a practical standpoint, hey, it's much easier to do one thing well than 5 things mediocre. So I think a lot of teachers feel pressure when they have a new device and, hey, they look at 60,000 educational apps or however there are. They see, well, gee, I've got to be integrating so much and doing so much. But they can be overwhelmed. And so it's, I think, great to be purposeful and systematic, and maybe focusing on an app or two that provide a wide range of creative possibilities, wide range of learning environments, focus on using them well, and then later on move on. And so find that proper balance between evergreen apps and some content apps.
Awesome, thanks, Tom. And I do want to see if Jason and then maybe Todd also have some thoughts around this question of effective teaching and learning with mobile devices.
Sure, and I think this is a very important one. I consider myself a technology guy, and had an iPad well before the pilot came around, and before our professional development with Tom and EdTech Teacher. I think the teachers came in with some common misconceptions of how a tablet can be used properly and effectively. And like Tom had alluded to before, when I came in, I had a list of, okay, I can't wait to find the coolest science apps out there. I want to get 20 of them, and I can't wait to use them throughout the year. The second thing I came in looking for is, oh God, there is no Microsoft Word. How am I going to do word processing? And through the professional development, which was essential to change those misconceptions, we all realized, the group of us all come in with the same misconceptions that using this device, like Tom said before, is not about your science specific apps, nor is it about solely word processing, but to find these educational apps, or use the educational apps that are more production based apps, and rather than consumption. And I think that was one of the key things that I learned from day one, that without that professional development and learning that I think that I would have gone in a completely different direction. with the iPad, and my classroom would have looked a lot different than what it looked like at the start of the year last year.
Thanks, Jason. And lastly, before we move on to a new topic, Todd, do you also want to weigh in on this idea of effectiveness?
Sure, I do, in part because I think this is such an important question, maybe the most important question to be asking in looking at using technology in the classroom, because similar to what Jason was just saying a little bit, personally, I'm a little bit of a technology geek, but as an educator and as an educational leader, if the best technology is a pencil and a piece of paper, then use it. I want teachers to choose what's going to be most effective. So then it's really important that the question is, what is effective? And interestingly enough, I think it's the kids who will tell you, maybe explicitly, maybe not, what's really effective. They will tell you if they are learning. They will tell you if they're being challenged. They will tell you if they're creating, because when they are creating, they can't wait to show it to you and show it to everybody. So if the technology is being used effectively, it's being used to give kids more opportunities to be creative. It's being used to give kids more opportunities to collaborate and do critical thinking. And I think in that classroom, you'll see kids who need to be challenged being challenged. You'll see kids who need to be supported being supported. And I think one of the great promises of technology, in particular one-to-one technology, is the possibility for individualization, which without the technology can feel really, really daunting. But suddenly when you have the technology tools as a teacher and when the students have it in their hands, it suddenly feels a lot more possible. And that's really what we should be doing for kids. So that, in looking for effectiveness, that's my gold standard, I guess.
I think that's great. And I think one of my colleagues that I've worked with who's at UCLA, Thomas Phillip, and I just had an article thinking about pedagogy and mobile devices, and really kind of thinking one of the things he's coined is this idea of the context, not the tool, right? That it's not, we're not using mobile devices for the sake of using mobile devices as much as it is for the frames and modes of learning and education that come out and that they enable, right? And that they can amplify in that sense. I'm going to completely switch to a new topic, which might hark back to something earlier, but this also comes from the chat. And Susie, I'm going to ask you first. This is a question about control in the classroom. So the specific question was, how do I control a student to stay on task when a device is in their hands? And so I'm curious if you've had any issues around classroom management. I think for new teachers especially, this can be probably the most daunting part of jumping into the classroom.
It's a huge topic that we talk about in a lot of the courses that I've been teaching. I think that classroom management is probably the most important part of really getting devices into the classroom in a way that's effective for student learning. And being able to set the parameters and the schedules and the expectations and the routines that everybody knows what they are and agrees on how they're going to work in the classroom makes a huge difference. So just like at the beginning of a school year, you have your students work with you to create classroom rules for the year. It shouldn't be any different when it comes to moving devices into the classroom. You should sit down with the students, talk about your concerns, talk about your hopes for the program and what it is that you think that you would like to see, but your students will come up with amazing ideas and they'll come up with the rules. And if they come up with them, they're more apt to follow them. In our class, we actually did a little iPaddling license. So students had to learn the rules, they had to take a test, and they earned their license. And then if they ended up, breaking any of the rules, then they knew that their license could be revoked and they would have to be retested at another time to be able to earn that privilege back. They know that it's a huge deal to be able to have these devices in the classroom and they value that opportunity. But I think it also takes a certain vigilance on the part of the teacher, plus you also have to exude vigilance. So even if you feel like you might not be as vigilant as you need to be, those students need to think that you are all eyes and all ears all the time. And that happened in classrooms even before devices. So it's amplified now, but it definitely shouldn't change with devices in the room. And to be frank, students sitting across the room misbehaving looks the same whether they have devices on their laps or a book in their lap or a note that they're trying to write. They're obvious and they will totally throw each other under the bus. So just keep your eyes and ears open and put on your sneakers and do some drive-bys in the classroom.
The evil of children to throw each other under the bus. I love it.
Oh, yeah.
Todd, do you want to ring in on this as well?
Yeah, just very quickly, because I think Susie's right in part on the vigilance, and the right that's some, you should be that way anyway. Um, I think that it's also okay to trust our students, and that, you know, I'm not on task 100% of my workday, um, and it's occasionally they might go off task, but it's okay to trust them. And I think when they have work that is engaging, that's exciting, when they are creating and producing and collaborating, they're less likely to be off task than they would in a traditional classroom. So I think there's things to watch out for, but I also think in some ways it's less likely to be an issue.
Thanks, Todd. And Tom, as someone who's probably seen a lot of work in classrooms, I'm curious if you have some other thoughts around this issue.
Sure, I'll build on what Todd just said. I think in terms of classroom management, the best strategy is a good lesson. So first of all, think of the iPad. The iPad's not conducive to typing, and yet we have classrooms in which it's very much a teacher-centric environment with the teacher at the front of the classroom. They're disseminating information, a passive audience. That's exactly the type of environment where the students will start checking email or go to Facebook. I see it, frankly, in our own summer workshops. But we frame our instruction, and many effective tech integrationists put students at the center of the learning process. So there's a challenge, there's a prompt that's meaningful. The students have to construct content, and there's a time frame. So they have to do that within the time frame. So in those kinds of environments, those sort of constructivist environments where kids are creating content and they have a meaningful purpose and there's a time limit, they're less likely to go off task and be going to their Facebook page.
That's great. And I'm reminded of a student I've written about who I called Dante when I was working with ninth graders. And Dante, when he first came into my class, he came in months late, and he basically said, you know, you should just let me stay in the back, Mr. Garcia, because the last teacher I had, I made her cry. And so that was kind of our agreement, was I leave him alone, which I didn't do, and he wouldn't make me cry, which I thought would have been a fun challenge. But I tend to cry in my classroom anyways. Anyway, I'm getting off task. But when I did give my students the iPods, my student, he stayed in the back and he tended to try to keep to himself, but instead he would stare at his iPod and type all day, and then he would text me at the end of the class and would write and kind of rhyme around, write raps around whatever it is we were talking about in class. And he basically used this as a tool for production that really opened up avenues for him to participate that weren't available to him, or he didn't feel safe engaging in prior. So it's just something that's been coming to my mind. Jason, I'm curious if you have some thoughts around this issue of collaboration. Then I'm going to switch topics after that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would like to add to that. You know, one of the things that you alluded to before that I found to be very successful with the mobile devices is when you have a student in the classroom that tends to fall behind and then tends to misbehave or act out. There are definitely strategies that you can use using the device where this student can let you know what they know without the class or the rest of the class realizing whether or not they know something. And in many occasions, especially in a direct instruction lesson, those are the kids that are going to act out because it's a way for them to kind of save face. And there are methods and there are apps that you can use to deliver lesson and to receive feedback from students. And I've found that those have kept the kids completely invested. And going back to what Tom said, you know, if you have the right lesson plan, you could walk into a classroom and you wouldn't hear a pin drop because they're so invested in the lesson that they're doing. Do you want me to speak to collaboration as well?
Yeah, that'd be great. I think the question specifically from the chat that I was thinking of with collaboration, sorry, is cart and horse, and I've got the order wrong here. But the question is, what is the best way for kids to collaborate on work using their mobile devices? So maybe Jason, you can chime in, and then Susie.
Sure. You know, we have found you know, a variety of methods for students to collaborate. You know, you can use Google Drive where you can have students simultaneously adding to a document. You can use Explain Everything, where students can begin a project and then send an unfinished project to another student. They can work on it and they can bounce that back and forth. Another one that through EdTech Teacher with Tom, Greg has coined this term. I think it's app mashing. I'm saying that right? Tom, you'll have to correct me if I'm saying it wrong. But it's where you take multiple apps and you have a kid maybe create a video that's going to be part of a project, and another kid create another piece of that project, and they all have to work together to come to a common point, but they're all using different tools to then come together into one app to create a final project. And you know, at one point, one kid may be a videographer, but you know, the next time you do a project like that, that student wouldn't be the video person. They may shift to a different role. And it's a way for kids to work together, because they can't just go off on their own and do their own thing and then just come together and it's going to fit. They have to plan and really come up with common goals and common research. And I found that to be a great way to do it, and to give each kid their own kind of set of parameters and expectations, and it's been really successful.
Antero, I think you're muted.
I totally am muted. I was wondering why everyone else was muted. Thanks. Susie, I'm wondering if you can chime in on this issue of collaboration as well.
Yep, absolutely. Jason hit a lot of them. As the year goes by, you start to think of new ways that the kids can work together. And for us, sometimes they would share a device and work at the same time, whether it was recording fluency or it was working on creating like a comic book together or trying to write a poem together. Sometimes they would just work on one device in that way. Sometimes they would take turns and they would have, say, one student start, let's say, like a piece of creative writing, and then we would pass the iPads around and then somebody else would have to finish it. Wouldn't necessarily always be in pairs, but you would end up getting somebody else's device. And also we would do a lot of problem solving, where I would create a problem, usually in math, or a vocabulary problem in ELA, and then we would be able to give it to somebody else to see if they could solve it, and then it would come back and we would correct it. It was a neat way for students to be able to be the teacher in lots more situations. And I'm trying to think. They created a lot of like the flip over math videos, the collaborative videos when they would do like a top 10 things about the solar system or top 10 things about third grade. They did a lot of storyboarding before they even touched a device, which was what I thought was great about the days that we didn't have devices in the classroom. We were able to prepare in ways that we would be ready to hit the ground running once they rolled in.
That's great. And then, Tom, do you also want to chime in on this issue of collaboration?
Sure. I think we have about 20 million students that have Google accounts, and so you have schools and school districts that subscribe to the Google Apps service, and everyone in the institution has a Google account. And so using an app such as Google Drive creates all sorts of possibilities to construct and deconstruct documents, to collaboratively produce essays, poems, slideshows, and other types of files and documents. So Google Apps is a natural, especially for those who have Google Apps accounts. And Subtext is a fascinating app, and I love the collaborative aspect of it, because it enables you to bring in a book, a PDF, even a web page, and then collaboratively teachers and students can be taking notes. The teacher can leave questions and prompts for the students, can actually create polls and surveys and quizzes, and then the teacher can track all the different contributions of students within the app. And there are some teachers in class that will open up the document, the book, the web page, whatever it is, in subtext, and the teacher will add his or her notes. So now you have an aggregate of everyone's contribution, at least in terms of note-taking. And it's a wonderful collaborative combined resource for teachers and students. And then look at the technology that we're in right now, and we know there are many companies that are developing apps that are going to exploit the possibility of this video interface and our ability to chat and look at the same document and share our screen and things of that nature. So there's certainly much more collaborative technologies that are on the horizon.
Thanks, Tom. And I'm curious to hear from Todd as well as from you, and then if we have time as well from Jason, from everybody, Jason and Susie, around issues of support. What kinds of administrative support, teacher training is going to be needed in terms of distributing mobile technology into classrooms and one-to-one programs as they roll out, especially in this new year. Todd, do you have thoughts around this?
Sure. I mean, you mentioned one type of support embedded in the question, which is the professional development support. And I think by and large, my bias is that the answer is in the room. The teachers we have in the room on the ground can figure out the answer. On the other hand, one-to-one technology can be such a complex shift for people that it really helps to provide some dedicated support, even if your bias is that that we can just collaborate within ourselves on it. So that's the effort we made with EdTech Teacher in particular. But looking at one-to-one and saying we really want to do this right, and we want teachers to feel like, as I've said earlier in the hour, that this empowers them and not have them get hung up on things that would get in their way and decide that maybe it's not worth their time. So I think there's an element of logistical support involved in it, which isn't the kind of exciting kind, but which is the time, the scheduling, providing the professional development. They need more time to collaborate if they're going to do this well. So being able to provide that, and obviously all of the other kind of technical support that goes around one-to-one technology. We're really beefing up our wireless support in the school and things like that. And then I think the moral support that I've referenced earlier, so that they really know. I feel like I can't over communicate enough that we want you to experiment, we want you to try, we want you to fall flat on your face, because that's where we're going to get the real learning. And then I think to not leave ourselves as administrators out of that. Teachers want feedback. So I have found that making sure that while the teachers are the center of those professional development conversations, that the administrators and all the other people are a part of them too. And because they really want to know when you're in their classroom and how it's working, what they can do better, and I think providing them for that in an honest, supportive, constructive way is the best service we can provide as administrators.
Thanks, Todd. And Jason, do you have thoughts around this as well?
Yeah, I definitely do. Administrative support has been huge as far as the success of our program, and I think the key is exactly what Todd said, is that the administration has allowed us the ability to be creative, to try new things, to experiment, and allowed us to fail. It's one of those things where Rome wasn't built in a day, and I think it's really difficult for an experienced teacher who has everything set and going for them to come in with a new tool and then all of a sudden realize things are failing when they had everything perfect or what they think of perfect as before. That's been huge. And I think the other thing, or adding to that, is that it all doesn't need to work or be perfect on day one. When I look back to the beginning of the pilot, day one, or the first month of the pilot compared to what we were doing in June is completely different, and it does take time, and I'm really looking forward to where we move forward, because a whole nother year, I'll look at this September and I'll look at next June, and I guarantee that what we're doing has advanced, but it's definitely time and being allowed to try different things, to fail, to move on, and try things a different way.
Thanks, Jason. And then Tom, let's hear from you a little bit about this. I'm sure you've probably spent most of your summer around this issue of support for this topic.
Sure, I still am. Well, you know, the real challenge, I think, is not learning the iPad or not learning apps. There are many of the features of the iPad that's intuitive, and many features of the apps are intuitive. I think the real challenge for teachers is how to take this new technology and use it in purposeful, effective, and even innovative ways that augment or maybe even redefine the learning experience. Just a simple example, we often begin with a warm-up activity, and teachers on their own learn how to, for example, shoot video and take pictures and take a screenshot. But then we stop and ask them, okay, so how can these elements help formative and summative assessment? And then there's usually silence. Because what we know is when new technologies are introduced, we tend to use them in traditional instructional practices because we hasn't necessarily have had time or the context to understand how they might be used in innovative ways. But then, you know, maybe take a minute or two, and the teachers will chime in and say, well, with a screenshot, that means I could capture students' work at any point in the classroom. Terrific. That's a great element for effective formative assessment. That, hey, we can shoot video of that exemplary science lab over in the corner that the two students are embarked in. Terrific. Now we have models of exemplary activities or maybe behavior in an elementary classroom. Two kids are cooperating effectively. That's now filmed that could be shown to other students. So really the challenge is the teaching and learning aspect of it. In taking something that's new and trying to use it in ways that play to the strengths of the device, but also augment the experience from the traditional pen and paper environment. So that's one of the biggest challenges. I think what we try to do is we try to empower the teachers that are part of the workshops and part of the presentations. We know, as Todd pointed out, that they're the change agents. They're the ones that are going to provide sort of the long-term progress and change. But we can come in and with our perspective of different schools and districts, and we can help sort of guide them. And hey, these are effective strategies. These are effective practices. These are apps that are being used currently and being used well at schools. And hey, here's our ways of thinking of the iPad or thinking of these apps that you may not have thought about before. So, you know, hopefully we can help nurture and propel those change agents that are the teachers and admins in the school or the school district.
Thanks, Tom. And I think just in terms of time, we're going to just go really quickly in terms of last thoughts. We can just do this, I guess, left to right, but there's the creepy bubbles that are John, and we don't talk about him. So, Jason, if you have any burning thoughts, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, we can go to Susie. Jason, what are you thinking?
There's the last two things that I think two unintended outcomes of having the iPad that we've seen as a whole team in Medfield is that our teacher collaboration amongst each other is vastly increased, and it's been amazing working with a group of teachers that all work together with using these common apps. And then on the student side too, I have seen students from the beginning of the year learn some very essential 21st century problem-solving skills when things aren't going right with their device. Over the course of the year, they've learned how to problem solve and figure that out. And that's a skill that I hadn't seen develop as much as I have with these mobile devices. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Jason. Susie? And Susie, you might be muted.
The microphone, there we go. I couldn't move my mouse fast enough. Summertime is a great time to recharge, but I just always want to remind teachers that they shouldn't wait for the next professional development session or the next conference before they try and learn something new. In order to be able to propel themselves through a school year and to really bring effective learning into the classroom for their students, they have to embed their own learning into their everyday routine. And whether that's reaching out online, there are so many awesome networks to get involved in online, or reaching out to those teacher leaders that are in your own local area to be able to support where you're going next. There's always somebody above you that you can turn to, and there's always somebody behind you that you can turn around and encourage. And I think it's important for teachers to do both in order to raise the bar for everybody. So summertime's a great time to get that routine started.
Thanks, Susie. Todd?
Yeah, just a couple of quick thoughts that I'll try to tie together as one. I think that technology, what we've been talking about, is a really, to me, interesting intersection of pragmatism and idealism. So we need to prepare our kids for work and college and career and whatever it might be. They're going into a world full of technology, so it's very pragmatic to get them using this, but it also allows us to do things we always wanted to do and couldn't before, and always allows us to have students do things they always wanted to do and we wanted them to do, but they couldn't do before. So it's a really nice intersection of that. And then one other thing that it does, we've been talking about kids kind of connecting with each other. This is a great opportunity related to what Susie was just saying for teachers, for schools, even whole districts to kind of deprivatize and open up our practice as educators. And that only makes us all better. So I would wrap up there.
Thanks, Todd. And really quickly, I'm worried about time. Tom, last thought?
Sure, I think it's quite natural that the first-year teacher is going to be thinking about logistics and workflow and making sure they know the apps and the student know the apps. But as students are creating multimedia projects and all these different mediums or modalities that are working in, we've got to be thinking about how do we assess where are the signs of visible thinking. So we really have to be thinking of the formative assessment process and making sure we're having kids document the thinking that goes into that screencast, the thinking that goes into that movie, whether it be a conversation, whether they hand in an outline, do a storyboard. We have to be thinking about that along with logistics and the immediate priorities of making sure everything's working.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. I really appreciate hearing from all of you. I always wish these conversations go longer than an hour. By tomorrow, we should have a full recording of this webinar and other curated content up on connectedlearning.tv that you can share with your networks. This wraps up our first webinar of the month, and we encourage everyone watching to keep the conversation going by using the Twitter hashtags ETTMobile and Connected Learning, and by posting on the Connected Learning Google+ community. Next Wednesday, August 14th, from 4 to 5 p.m. Pacific, we'll meet up again on Livestream to explore some of the logistics behind getting going with mobile devices in your classroom. Check out connectedlearning.tv for more information on all the events happening this month and how to get involved. Thanks again, everyone.